Hey there, Harold Pollack. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Glenn. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, welcome to the Glenn Show at bloggingheads.tv. Glenn Loury here, Brown University, talking with my friend and longtime Confederate here at Blogging Heads, Harold Pollack of the University of Chicago.
Mhm.
I'm also at Brown University, and the election is right around the corner, and we thought that what better way to spend the Saturday afternoon than to kick it around a little bit about all that's going on in our politics and future of the country hanging in the balance and all of that. It's a pretty dramatic moment that we're facing here, Harold.
It sure is. I take comfort in the fact that there's only a one-third chance of national catastrophe. So,
You say one third?
that's
That
probably on the high side, but there's a significant chance of a Trump victory. I think we have to acknowledge that it is not in the bag.
it would appear so, and that number, even if that number were one fifth, would seem like an extraordinarily high number if the consequence were quote national catastrophe close quote.
Yeah.
But this is democracy. We should the same people, that's you and me,
Hmm.
who think that the decision in Holder versus Shelby County, you know what I'm talking about, the Supreme Court decision that
Hmm.
overturned Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act. This is down in the weeds, but it's very important,
Yeah.
which was the formula used to calculate which were the districts that would come under jurisdiction of
Hmm.
Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which was the pre-clearance provision. So they can't change anything about their elections without getting pre-clearance from the U.S. Justice Department. And the Supreme Court overturned that decision. And most people who were advocates of civil rights thought that was a horrible thing, kind of gutting the Voting Rights Act. The same people is where I'm going with this, who celebrate the Voting Rights Act and lament the Supreme Court's decision there, should affirm the outcome of a democratic process, whatever it might be. Should they not? I
Well,
mean, yeah,
there's no question that we have to obey what the outcome is. That doesn't mean it's not a national catastrophe. By the way, you mentioned voting rights. It is not out of the realm of the possible that in a close state like North Carolina, where they have really made every effort to
yeah.
hinder African American voting rights, that voting rights could be a really critical factor in this election. And it is sort of amazing. The court documents out of North Carolina were really pretty striking. Where the state basically commissioned studies of how black and white people voted and went and outlawed the ways that black people were.
Well, it instruct me on this because they didn't do studies of how Democratic and leaning and Republican leaning people voted. They explicitly did a racial study.
Yeah, they did. They basically said African Americans vote almost entirely Democratic, and so strategically, the way that we can gain a strategic advantage by understanding the ways that African Americans attempt to vote early, the types of IDs that African Americans use to go to the polling places, and so on, and use whatever mechanisms are available to hinder that. And it was really quite remarkable. If you look at the work, Ari Berman's work is probably the best
Yeah.
on this. I mean, it is really striking how there's an almost guileless way that it was discussed, where they were basically saying, "Of course, we're using race as a proxy. Well, this is the state we live in. Blacks vote Democratic, and whites mainly vote Republican. So if we want to give a strategic advantage to our party, of course, we're going to focus on race." And the court was actually
Well,
kind of.
everybody is doing that, Harold. I'm not sure I understand the point. No, that is to say, if you're a smart Democrat trying to use all the data available to try to predict where you want to allocate your resources and how you want to maximize your turnout and how you want to be most effective at winning the election, you know that demographic factors like race and education and gender and so on correlate with the way that people are inclined to vote. You target your advertising, you send your canvassers, you use whatever the instruments that are available to you to maximize your turnout, and using race as one of the predictors of what people are going to do would be a very natural thing to do. So
Well,
I'm not sure why you would be shocked, that people are
well,
using race. I mean, Democrats, of course, are using demographic data and trying to figure out what they want to do.
Well, I think there's a difference between targeting your advertising and closing polling places and attempting to, in the name of a non-existent in-person voter impersonation problem, trying to challenge the voting rights of people. North Carolina has this very strange process where individual citizens could challenge the legitimate voting rights of another citizen.
I
And
see.
I mean, there's just a series of things that are clear
So
violations of.
closing polling places that are convenient to black voters in order to suppress the black vote is one of the things that's been identified by a federal court as the practice of the North Carolina, political leaders and such. I'm
That,
asking. I really don't know. I confess ignorance.
Well, that was actually one of the more benign ones, but that was one of them. And things like eliminating Sunday voting when it was understood that African American churches would do this. And there is a dishonorable aspect of this. It's one thing to say I want to. There's a range of tools that you can use in the political fray to try to excite your voters and demobilize other voters, but to literally try to make it harder for the other side to vote. And I'm sure Democrats will do this in places. New York State is a place where some of the rules that Democrats have imposed are problematic. I don't think it's 100% Republican, but I think that the systematic effort in purple states to hinder minority voters and to present it as an effort to curb the non-existent
Yeah.
in-person. I mean, that is really pretty terrible.
Well, you say
I mean,
non-existent. I'm not sure that's correct, but in any case, not big enough to warrant what it is that they're doing.
well, there's 31 cases verified apparently out of 1 billion votes cast. Now, that's about the number of women that have been sexually harassed by Bill Clinton and Donald Trump put together. I mean, it's not a problem.
To tell me that I can't prove voters fraud is a problem is not to tell me it's illegitimate for me to be concerned about voter fraud. I want my elections to be secure, just like I want my property to be secure. If you told me, hold on, let me just finish. I put a lock on my bicycle on my back porch. You come along and tell me there's no evidence that any bicycles have been stolen in this neighborhood. Suppose that's true, or suppose I can't find evidence to that effect. I still want to lock my bicycle. It makes me feel better when I go to sleep at night. It makes me feel better about my electoral process, that I know that it's a very difficult thing to perpetrate fraud. I don't have to demonstrate the existence of fraud to justify a concern about fraud, do I?
Well, the problem with that is that when Republican officials have been asked under oath in a variety of court cases, okay, here's what you said in public about how worried you are about voter fraud. And now now that you're under oath, let's really talk about what that issue is. It's clear that they cannot point to any cases, and in fact, what's really going on, it's entirely a partisan calculation that they know that. I mean, it's just so disingenuous, and it's so indicative of the idea that instead of trying to compete for votes within the African American and Latino community, that that they're pursuing this strategy. And the only silver lining of it is that it has so offended minority communities that there has been a political backlash to it, which has in some ways aided the Democrats. But it is really kind of a there is a sense in which it is projecting a view that, I mean, clearly with the demographics of the country changing, it seems to me it's hard to completely separate that from the white ethno-nationalist dimension of the Republican Party. And I just
wait a minute.
I don't know if I just think that we've allowed this to fester a long time.
I want to ask people to present official ID before I allow them to cast a ballot. I want that to be the rule in my state. Mm-hmm. A study calculates that the consequences of that will be relatively more depressing of African American than of others, because fewer of them have the ID, and it's costly to get it or whatever. I like that. This is all hypothetical. Mm-hmm. I like the idea that it will have that negative effect. That is an attack on black voting rights. It doesn't feel to me like a universal requirement that has been calculated to have a disparate effect is the same thing as withholding voting rights from people, because after all you have to do is get an ID.
Well,
the same campaign. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let's suppose that there's many different types of ID, and I go through and I say, hunting licenses are okay, college IDs are not okay.
Yeah,
and
I see
the kinds of IDs that people have who are low-income people or who are college students or who are people. I mean, I agree that the line between sort of sleazy partisan manipulation of the voting practices and civil rights violations is sometimes hard to define. But this is an effort to prevent other people who are almost 100% of the time casting legitimate votes. It's an effort to hinder their ability to cast their ballot.
No,
and that is, And that to me is dishonorable as a way of conducting our democracy. And I wish we had a less partisan way to do it. There's other voting practices that are more bipartisan in their sleaziness, like redistricting practices where both parties do it.
Oh, I'm quite sure that if these states were being governed by Democrats and not Republicans, the things that you're talking about are happening in states where the state legislatures and the governor's offices are in the hands of Republicans, that the Democrats wouldn't stop short of trying to find ways to maximize their electoral performance by manipulating, if they can do so legally, the process that's at hand. I don't know why. I don't know why the race of the voter. I mean, we have a history of ugly denial of African Americans of the right to vote, and then we have partisan politics. Partisan politics is what it is, and demography is a part of partisan politics. It's a part of redistricting. Everybody's doing that. If you get to draw the lines of where the district's boundaries are, you're going to draw them in a way that takes race into account because you know how people vote. Everybody does that.
Well,
so it feels to me like you're like this argument. There's one thing to say. There's partisanship, manipulation of process to benefit parties. Everybody's guilty of that. Another thing to say is African Americans used to be slaves, were denied citizenship. We have a history of racial suppression and marginalization. It seems to me that those are two different things, and it's the conflation of them. A Republican governing apparatus wants to set the rules so as to maximize its chance of winning, and then they get labeled as Ku Klux Klansmen because they're doing it in low. Yes, race is involved in that, but race is involved in everything that we're doing politically.
I didn't label them as Ku Klux Klansmen, first of all.
Okay.
I mean, there is the reality that as soon as the Voting Rights Act was relaxed, that all of these states just ran into a bunch of stuff that was clearly under the old voting rights procedures a violation. You know, many of these Republican legislatures just raced to do it. And, you know, it's true that it's hard to separate partisan politics from demography, but one reason it's hard to do that is because the Republicans have chosen a set of policies and messages that have made them a nearly 100% white party. And so it's not exactly like we randomly happened to discover that minorities were all Democrats and you know there weren't many minority Republicans, and therefore this process kind of played out in it was like some sort of exogenous shock. Oh, now we can see that partisan politics happens to be correlated with demographic patterns. You know, there's those things are intermingled. And
tell me, let's just explore that for a minute. What is it in the Republican agenda that's anti-black? They have a platform. They're running a party. Yep. What is Rance Priebus or anybody saying? A la tax cuts or trade policy or energy policy or global warming or whatever that makes them anti-black. How are the Republicans anti-black?
Well, I think that
Paul Ryan is anti-black because he believes in the market and he thinks Social Security should be privatized and he thinks private health care accounts are the best. How does that make them anti-black? They're Republicans. It seems to me it's the Democrats who are playing the race card here. The Democrats trying to exploit the demographic voting advantage, frame legitimate policy debate issues like how do you do health care, what should taxes be, in the same way that Joe Biden said when he calls, you remember that phrase, and excuse me for going on, but I just want to get this on the table. Joe Biden says when Mitt Romney is running for president, if he gets elected, he's going to give the Wall Street bankers anything that they want. You know, the bankers will be unchained, and he'll put you all back in chains. This is the famous quote from Joe Biden. How is that not simply trying to put a racial coloration on a legitimate ideological debate? How do you govern banks?
Not every issue where Republicans take a conservative policy perspective should be described, in a racialized way. Some are, and I think certainly if you look at some of the criminal justice policies, and another example that I find, which I cannot believe is not part of the. We're having such a horrible presidential campaign where there's no policy debate at all.
I know.
So the Medicaid expansion, every state which has a conservative governing majority and where the majority of poor people are non-white, that's basically where all of the people are who are shut out of the Medicaid expansion. We have 3 million Americans who are uninsured and who are getting zero support because they are too poor. They're getting zero support to get health coverage. And this is Texas, Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, the places where poor people are predominantly white that are often very conservative places like Arkansas, West Virginia, Kentucky, they've expanded Medicaid. I think the politics of race are a part, not just race, but also immigration is a part of that. Now,
Well,
it is it the entirety of it? No, but it is a part of that.
I'm
And I
just
think,
wondering, I mean, we're both social scientists,
yeah,
how I would demonstrate that if I take a sample of states, some of which have affirmed Medicaid expansion under Obamacare and others of which have not, I could demonstrate a racial motive in that decision. I mean, you just pointed to a correlation.
yeah,
I take your word for it. I haven't checked the data myself, but let me grant you that.
hmm
I don't know how that adds up to anything other than very circumstantial evidence that these state officials are motivated by racial enmity.
Well, I just think when I look at the policy debate in Mississippi, for example, when they were debating whether they should have an exchange, whether they should expand Medicaid, and you look at overwhelming support among African Americans for expanding this, very limited support among whites, and a kind of political dialogue uh, that to my eye doesn't prove, uh, but suggests a politics where the history of racial polarization in that state is a big part of that, and the idea that characterizing the Medicaid expansion as a welfare program, sort of pulling out all, it is it is a domain where there's a fuzzy Venn diagram between sort of racialized politics and very legitimate policy differences. But here you have something where the federal government was paying a 100% matching rate that drops all the way down to 90%, and where all the interest groups in the states are pushing, please take this money. All the hospitals, where the big cities are really wanting this. And I just think that it is. I don't know what the burden of proof is. Can I prove that correlation is, that is the dominant cause? No,
Well, let
but I
me.
think it's, and then, there are places where I can, like Maine, for example. You look at the governor of Maine and the kinds of statements that he makes, where he just comes out and says, he just makes statements about black people. But most places you don't see stuff like that. But it's an element.
Okay. And you're a healthcare policy expert. I'm not, so I'm inclined to defer. But a couple of
I
things.
agree, it's fuzzy though. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to, just talk about the politics of it. So, the Affordable Care Act is passed by a very narrow, the
hmm
slimmest of possible margins. It's extremely controversial. Something called the Tea Party movement
hmm
grows up. We have midterm elections in 2010, and Republicans make humongous gains and take
hmm
control of its Congress, etc.
hmm
And I'm just wondering what the politics at the state level look like. So, in some states, the population of people whom I might be able to attract to my side if I'm a Republican, uh,
hmm
contribute to attracting them to my side by expanding coverage of Medicaid, is
hmm
at least susceptible to voting for me. You know, poor people, people who are going to
hmm
be most benefited by this policy shift, I could conceivably win or lose their votes by what I do. In other states, my calculation is no matter what I do, they're not going to vote for me anyway. And here's my theory. My theory is the probability of expanding uh, Medicaid coverage under Obamacare is positively related to the uh, uh, you know to the responsiveness of voters for the party in power in that state to the social policy of the people who are in power in that state. So,
hmm
I do it if I think it's going to get me votes. I don't do it if I think it's not going to get me votes. And if it happens
hmm
that the beneficiaries from it are disproportionately black, but they also are disproportionately disinclined to vote Republican, and if Republicans are in power in the state, my theory predicts that there'd be this correlation that you point to: the blacker the beneficiary population, the less will be the expansion, but it wouldn't be because of an anti-black animus. It would be because
Yeah.
of a political calculation. I'm making this all up. It's just purely hypothetical, but
Oh,
it's only by way of demonstrating that the correlation doesn't prove the claim that you're making.
no, well, I agree that I agree that there's a lot more to be done there. Two things I would add. One is there is an interesting political science literature on the racialization of health politics. If you ask people the same, if you describe the Affordable Care Act and you describe it as the Bill Clinton health plan, and you ask people to vote about it, they give systematically different answers than when you say this is the Barack Obama plan. And you see a higher correlation with people's racial attitudes when it's framed as the centerpiece of Barack Obama's plan. And there's a lot of work, like people like Tesla. I don't know if you've seen this. There's a book called Change They Can't Believe In that talks that
I'm not saying.
So there's that. But by the other thing, by the way, about there is a lot of polling data on particularly Republican primary voters that, we just ask people things like, do you believe that President Obama was born in the United States? I mean, the support for birtherism and things like that. I mean, here you have a party. I mean, you say, how do we know that the racism is an issue in the Republican Party? To me, the exhibit A is the guy they nominated for president is Donald Trump. And I mean, here you have a guy who is the foremost proponent of birtherism in the United States, and who has made a whole series of statements that disparage a whole number of minority groups that would be intensely disqualifying within any party that relied on a diverse coalition of people. And instead, he becomes the nominee for president, and actually may become president based on that. And
I'm sorry, Harold. I'm not persuaded by that. I get it. I get the rhetorical argument, but what I remember are 17 people running for the Republican nomination. As I recall, the former governor of the state of Florida was running for the nomination. The sitting governor of the state of Ohio was running for the nomination. The sitting governor of the state of Wisconsin was running for the nomination. Senators who had fairly distinguished records in the Senate were running for the nomination.
Yeah, they lost to him. Yeah.
Hold on, let me just make my
I'm
point.
sorry,
My point is they didn't lose to him because of race. That you say the Republicans nominated this guy. Suppose, for the sake of argument, I grant you everything negative that you want to say about this guy. I don't want to dispute any of it. Okay.
Good.
They nominated this guy. Did they nominate him because he's a racist? Is it evidence of their racial? I mean, I don't. I'm about to apologize before I finish my sentence. Apologizing for saying.
That's probably prognostic. Before you say the sentence, you might want to think about that. Go ahead.
The well-considered sentence was, I don't think Donald Trump won that nomination because he's a racist and because the people who cast more Republican primary ballots for him than were cast for any Republican candidate in the history of the party did so because they're racist. I don't know for sure how he won it, but it looks to me like he outgained, outplayed, outbravadoed, out-insulted, his primary opponents and got more votes than they did. I don't think the people who voted him were voting because he was a racist.
Well, at a minimum, it was not seen as a disqualifying aspect. And it seems to me that his product differentiation was he was willing to say the things that a lot of people were thinking, but that were not willing to say straight up. Not just about black people, but about many other groups of people. And every now and then a black politician will emerge who is anti-Semitic and will attempt to, in the Democratic Party, will attempt to fill that market niche. And what's interesting is it doesn't work. Even in a 100% black district,
for example,
it doesn't. Stephen Cohen's primary opponent in Tennessee was an example. It turns out the Democrats are a very different looking party than the Republicans. And it really is a diverse coalition of people where it is not acceptable to express certain kinds of bigotry that are at least not viewed as disqualifying. I find it hard to believe. Suppose Donald Trump, it turned out Donald Trump had an affair with another man. Let's just make up some facts. Suppose he had an affair with another man. Do you believe he'd be the Republican nominee today?
No, he wouldn't.
There's any number of things that would be viewed as completely disqualifying. I mean, he has so many things that are disqualifying. A friend of mine said that his scandals provide kind of had a destructive interference pattern with each other. There's sort of so many that it becomes hard to focus on any one. But I mean, his distinctive characteristic was that in his announcement speech, he insults Mexican immigrants in a way that was kind of unbelievable. And that becomes a feature, not a bug, in gaining a foothold in the Republican primary. That is really, uh, to me, that is a deeply he is a symptom, not just a problem. It's not as if
So,
he showed up out of nowhere with this. We know.
okay, so statement to follow, apology being issued now. I didn't take Mexico's not sending their best. They're sending rapists and murderers, and some of them, I suppose, are good people, or something that's very close to that.
Yeah, that's very close to a quote. Yeah.
I didn't take that to be a bigoted statement, and that I'm sure says something about me that's not very good. Um, I got why some people were offended by it because it traffics in a certain kind of stereotype. He didn't say all Mexicans were thieves or whatever, but he did say they're not sending their best. He means to underscore a concern about criminal aliens and drugs coming across the border that he wants to protect America from. Uh, there's another way of saying that. I'm not sure that any way of saying it that had the bottom line. I hate sanctuary cities and I'm going to get rid of them. I'm going to make sure that anybody who comes into this country does so legally and not illegally. And by the way, people who are here without authorization, who are breaking our laws, I'm going to get them the heck out of this country. I'm not sure there's any way that you could say that that wouldn't be construed by La Raza as being anti-Mexican and racist. He didn't say it in the best way that he might have said it,
It,
but there's nothing racist in the sentiment that I want criminal aliens not to be admitted to the country.
is
Or
there's
is
such
there?
an
I mean, what am I missing?
well, I think that first of all, I think you're a person who has spent 20 years writing about the subtleties of speech communication and the ways that we communicate our what is unspoken about our latent values and uh, by what we're willing to say and
Okay.
how and Donald Trump is absolutely playing that. He's basically saying, I don't care that 85% of people in America are going to assume that I am prejudiced against Mexican Americans by making a statistically completely wrong-headed statement that is insulting to Mexicans. I'm just going to come out and say it, and I've gamed that out. I mean, Glenn Loury of all people understands precisely what Trump is communicating there,
Okay, so
and
he's dog whistling to
he's not.
a part of the conservative primary electorate with racial tropes, even though he's not explicitly.
A dog whistle being he picks up a trumpet. I mean, it is, and by the way, everything he says about his statistics about crime and so on are also completely wrong. But he has enough anecdotal evidence because there's 11 million undocumented immigrants that you can find any number of atrocities. I think I was going to do something on left-handed people.
No,
Barack Obama's left-handed, and so is Osama bin Laden.
no, I take the point. No, cherry picking. I mean, I've been saying this about Black Lives Matter for a long time. 1,000 people are killed by cops every year. A couple of dozen of them are unarmed black people killed by white cops. You can always cherry pick the cases of an unarmed black person killed by a white cop, and you can make it into a big deal. And you could always find a rapist who originated in southern Mexico and crossed the border illegally and came into the United States.
Yeah,
So I agree completely that that's not a that's scaremongering politics.
it's
That's demagoguery.
yeah, it is absolutely. I mean, the guy is a grifting demagogue in a way that is I've never seen anyone at an elite level of American politics who is as disreputable as this guy.
So let
And
me
I
ask
mean,
you
it's just
this,
amazing to me.
Harold, because he might win this election. We're
Yeah,
speaking here 3 or 4 days before the election. I don't know when our post is going to go up. I hope it goes up before the election. The
yeah,
guy could win, Harold.
yeah.
I mean, you acknowledge that. I mean,
Oh
maybe it's
yeah,
a 1 in 6, a 1 in 5 chance. He could win. So
yeah.
what is that saying? We do believe in democracy. Circling back to the beginning of this conversation, we believe in democracy. What is that saying about us that he could win?
Well, one thing it says is the amazing power of polarization. That essentially, it's I mean, clearly, I mean, I'd say that I know zero Republican policy wonks who are going to vote for Trump. Right. All the people I debated in 2012, 2008, not one of them is going to vote for Trump. But the entire electorate in the country, I mean, I can tell you that many Republicans, including elected officials, are terrified this guy's going to win. And yet, and I mean, every policy professional that I know who's a Republican is saying this guy is just, they want Clinton to win and they believe that this guy's dangerous. Now, whether they come out and say that publicly is another matter. But even given all the reasons why even Republicans recognize this, out in the country, the fact is, if you put up basically, if he's a red team, and I'm a red team person, I'm going to vote for the red team guy, and I think that the extent, I don't know how I would respond. I was trying to come up with a Democratic comparable to Trump. Like, how bad would it have to get for me?
How about Jesse Jackson, 1988?
Jesse Jackson, 1988 versus George H.W. Bush, 88.
Say Jesse Jackson gets the nomination in 1988, and he's Jesse Jackson, the one that we know and love or hate, whatever we think about Jesse Jackson. He's a pretty radical political figure within the Democratic Party, way to the left like Bernie Sanders, but also with a past. Yeah. I mean, you want Oppo research on Jesse Jackson? You can keep a team of investigators busy for a lifetime finding Oppo research on Jesse Jackson. So in my hypothetical, he gets close to winning the election. He's running against George Herbert Walker Bush in 1988. And he gets the nomination. It's a coup d'etat. How did it happen? The Democrats are all pulling their hair. And then, superdelegates are not enough. Somehow he gets the nomination. And then he's running for president. How's that for a scenario? Is the country equally? I mean, is anybody going to say, I like this hypothetical, actually, you're going to turn the nuclear codes over to Jesse Jackson? Yeah. Because you know what the response to that would be. You're a racist. You say that a black man can't be capable of running the country, that white people can run, et cetera, et cetera.
But you know what's interesting is that the hype. By the way, I think Trump is the best argument for superdelegates ever.
Yeah, agreed. I'm sure many Republicans agree with you about that.
And I do think that the core primary electorates, I think are a force for polarization that is a real problem. But I think there's a systematic difference between the parties. Notice the black Democrat who was elected president, we can trust with the nuclear codes, and it is. The fact is that the Democrats are a different kind of party than the Republican Party right now, and it's a much more. They're just not. They're really not similar.
Okay, let me ask you another kind of question, which is.
I think that's a great hypothetical, by the way. I do think that's a good hypothetical.
So we are pondering how it is that the Republicans could have nominated Donald Trump, and then we're pondering how it is that he could be in the running for winning this election. He could possibly win. We're all hoping that he doesn't. It's a danger to the country, but there's a real chance that he could win. Yeah. You didn't mention the name Clinton one time in your account of how come this guy's close to winning. And, it seems to me that it does have, quite apart from the yahoos who support him, quote unquote yahoos, the deplorables who support him, there is also the fact that he's running against somebody who's under investigation by federal authorities for various kind of shenanigans, and the foundation is a mess. And, Clinton, Bush, Clinton doesn't feel all that good to a lot of people about the country and stuff like that. Yeah. But she's your woman. Pardon me.
Yeah, by the way, it's funny. By the way, one of the striking things is, in part, there's been such a lack of attention to policy. In fact, I saw, there's a statistic that there have been that the total amount of airtime on network news spent on the email scandals exceeds all policy issues combined. And that's so depressing because it's such, she definitely screwed up the email, but it's so, it's so out of proportion that it's, that it's sad. I do think that, she has some weaknesses as a candidate. I think if we were it's funny, as a policy professional, I look at everything that she does and I'm like, she's a solid liberal that I basically, she's continuing Obama, slightly more liberal on domestic policy, slightly more conservative in the world. I understand this. And that's like the way I'm like ready to engage that. That's not at all the way the political conversation goes at all. Yeah. I do think that, the foundation thing isn't, It's actually a very worthy foundation that does a lot of good, and I think people misunderstand what the ethical issue is with the foundation. It's not that it's somehow a scam; it's that it's Bill Clinton basically did a reasonably mediocre job on things like HIV when he was president, and I think the love of his life is this foundation that tries to rectify that and gets HIV medications to poor people, and that
Well,
creates an enormous vulnerability for him because if I'm a wealthy, if I'm the government of Qatar, I can donate a lot of money to his foundation, and he's very grateful for that. It's not like he's greedy. It's that I've done this thing that actually gets me.
Harold, come on, man. You're an egalitarian. You're a liberal Democrat. 200 and plus $1 million of speaking fees over a decade, Harold?
Yeah, that's hard to defend.
Okay, just checking.
No, I agree. I think that there was a greediness about the speaking fees and stuff that is unbecoming, and that if I were advising I must say I checked the WikiLeaks thing. I only came up twice, and they were for some incidental things. It was sort of she's running against Trump. She's running against the KGB and the FBI at the same time. It's sort of an amazing combination of. I mean,
Yeah.
she's like all comers. The But I mean, it's so bizarre that I can't believe it. The I always thought that the best response she should have given was to say, is it ridiculous that I get $250,000 to give a lunch speech? Yeah, of course it's ridiculous. Welcome to America, Celebrity America 2016. It's insane.
Yeah.
I took the
I
money.
took what the market would bear. Yeah, I
Yeah,
hear you. Yeah.
you blame the game, not the player.
Yeah, she could have had Jay Z say that for her. Jay Z and Beyonce the other. Listen, let me ask you something
Yeah,
else, man.
yeah, let's go. Yeah, let's go.
Because I very much agree with this thing about zero policy discussion. You'd say the news is covering the emails much more than policy. They're also covering the sexual peccadillos of Trump more than the things that he's saying,
Which
including.
is like number 50 on my list of things I must say. I should say his affair. The thing that the latest thing with the affair is like number 50 in my list of concerns. The fact that he was groping women is more concerning.
But what do you say about this? So he says at every speech, America first, America first, America first.
Hmm.
Okay? That is a very clear articulation of a sentiment about the role of the United States in the world.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember ever hearing that position rebutted by Hillary Clinton explicitly. America first is wrong. We are not in the world business, the international relations business, in order to maximize the utility of the average American.
Yeah.
We're in that business because the post World War II dispensation left us in a unique historical position, and we have a responsibility to humankind
Yeah.
to exercise that position with an eye toward what is best for the well-being of our global community. America First is completely wrong as an idea. I don't remember ever hearing that said by the other candidate. How is it that you can let someone go around trumpeting something as clear and definitive as I'm going to build a wall, I'm going to stop trading, I'm going to put our people before all other people on the planet, and not bother to rebut it?
By the way, I think to some extent she has rebutted it, but it's just been lost in the signal to noise ratio, and what sort of comes through is so focused on the other stuff that,
Yeah,
I mean, that she's got 50 million policy papers and
yeah.
whatever that are making that point. But of course, the other aspect of America First is such a clear and explicit hearkening back to that very same slogan. And I mean, there's a sort of one of the things that I find so creepy about the Trump candidacy is there's so many far right tropes and isolationist tropes that sort of take you back. I mean, it's sort of astonishing to me that he would pick the term America First when, of course, that is from the
Well,
1930s.
yeah, he's daring his opponent to remind the voters of where that statement came from and what, if it had been followed in the 30s, it would have implied about the outcome of the conflict in Europe in the 1930s and 40s. He's inviting them, but the other side isn't taking up the bait. I mean, when Trump confronts Hillary Clinton at the last of the three debates by saying,
Mhm.
according to WikiLeaks, you want open borders in the Americas.
Yeah,
This is an invitation, not for her to say, yes, I want open borders. Of course, she's not going to say that.
yeah.
But it's an invitation for her to say, well, you want to build a wall on our southern border, and you go around trumpeting America first. That's not the way I view the role of our nation within the global order. Here's how I view the role of our nation within the
Yeah.
global order. She didn't do that.
Well,
Instead, she said, you got that information stolen from WikiLeaks and the Russians
yeah.
are, and why don't you, I mean,
You know what I think? Well, I do think that she made a basic strategic decision, which should have been adequate to have impeached Trump, but may not have been, which was at all opportunities to impeach him,
yeah,
to present him as a pathological figure.
right,
And instead of focusing on policy differences, to focus on the fact that he is personally unqualified and unfit in
right.
so many ways. And I do think that brought a cost to her in making it a little harder to sharpen those policy things when she was trying to that's an argument that doesn't require her to alienate people who have different views, and especially with the Sanders challenge, Sanders also is ambivalent about America's place in the global order. Like, for example, I'm very much in favor of the TPP. I mean, not that I'm in favor of every sentence in it,
Sure.
and especially the pharmaceutical provisions actually concern me a lot. But the basic idea of the TPP and the fact that the Obama administration spent 7 years making it the cornerstone of its specific policy,
Yeah.
it really disturbs me that we're going to jettison this thing based on. I'm hoping that if she's elected, that we can sort of bring back a SHME-PP with some dignified path to putting this through, because it is a critical part of
Well,
our.
that's what the partisan Republicans are predicting. If she's elected, she's going to walk back what she's been saying, because she's just been saying it to get past both Sanders and now the general election.
But I do. By the way, the other thing about the America First, it is sort of, as I mentioned to you. I mean, the sort of there are so many resonances to earlier periods in American history in the way that there's a sort of hard right movement that's been emboldened by Trump, and slogans like America First really reflect that. In like one of the examples I was telling you, I'm getting an incredible amount of anti-Semitic hate mail, and all of my friends who are
Wow.
have Jewish names who are writing against Trump are getting it. And I should say, I don't find it particularly frightening, because it's from people. A total stranger will email me and say things like, "I believe all Jews should be killed," and then it says, "I believe this is my opinion, is not a threat." Which of course it's carefully.
Oh
And
yeah, so the FBI doesn't go. Yeah.
and like all the time on Twitter, I get things that Jews should be sent to Auschwitz or whatever.
I'm
And
sorry.
all,
I'm very
all
sorry for that.
well, I actually don't find it personally.
I
My
would.
family actually finds it upsetting. I
I,
don't,
I would find it very upsetting,
and
because there are nuts out there with guns, Harold. You know that, and they know where you live.
that is true. That aspect, I can't say that it's totally unconcerning, but there's a way in which I'm kind of happy that I get that hate mail in a strange way, because it's a reminder that you can't buy your bigotry a la carte. There's a group of people. I have a couple relatives in my family who are Trump supporters, and they're Trump supporters because they don't like what Obama is thinking about
That's
Israel.
on your wife's side of the family, is it?
No, it is actually not. And
These are Jewish American Trump supporters.
actually, only one is Jewish, but
Okay.
there's
Yeah.
uh,
So
and and the fact that he is obviously prejudiced against African Americans and Muslims and Latinos, and says all of these things, it's kind of a useful reminder that the cloud of people around Trump who are so drawn to his racism in these other realms actually don't like Jews a whole lot either. I think it's. I mean, he's getting very low support among Jews, even among Jews who usually vote Republican, in a way that I think does credit to our community. People are saying, we can't, we know this, we know this kind of rhetoric, and we can't support this. And I do find these emails to be a reminder of the world that my father lived in, that I never lived in, where anti-Semitism was really,
okay.
something more serious.
Here's another. I apologize in advance of what I'm getting ready to say. Statement, which is the guy who runs around saying the inner cities are really in bad shape and I'm going to fix it. Trust me, vote for me. I'm going to fix it. Here's what I want to do. I want to bring jobs back. I want to keep the streets safe. I want to get the schools working. How is that anti-black? I don't see that as anti-black.
Well, how about the Central Park Five, when they've been exonerated by DNA, and he's still saying that he's still going after them. How about, I mean, the
So his club in Florida, which didn't used to admit Jews and blacks, wherever it is, and Miami Beach or wherever it is, and he comes in and he admits Jews and blacks. I mean, yeah,
he's
God,
made
I
so
don't want
many.
to be in the position of trying to defend this guy
How about
against
the
the charge of
consent?
racism. It's just that
How
he
about the
played.
consent decrees about racial discrimination and the properties that he owned?
If
I mean,
if
they're
you were in the
racist
real
stuff.
estate business in New York City in the 1960s, he inherited this from his father in the 1970s. You well might have been subject to some such suits as well. I mean, it was a different time. It's very easy for us to project back onto that. No, I'm not defending the housing discrimination stuff. Yes, there were suits brought, and he settled the suits. But does it make a landlord who's worried about the composition of his building? Does that make them into in the 1960s? Is that making them to some
Or
kind of
how about in
uh,
2015 when you're talking about the president of the United States as and you're a birther? I mean, it's just the guy's obviously a racist. It's just, or at least he's obviously, to the extent that he's obviously anything other than saying whatever he thinks the market will bear. How about the guy saying that black people shouldn't control his money, that he wants short guys with yarmulkes to be the people that are counting his money? I mean, there's uh, we can
Harold?
history. We can go on. We can
So
go
do
on.
I. So do I.
Well, you can count my money anytime, Glenn. I'll tell you.
Now, I'm a PhD in economics. I should be counting my own money. But what I'm what I'm saying is, the idea that I want my running backs to be black guys built like brick, outhouses, and I want my money counters to be Jewish guys wearing yarmulkes is crude. I grant you that it's crude.
Yes.
Is it really racist? Ah, gosh, I don't know, man. I don't. I mean, you know,
Okay. I'll say. Well, first of
for
all,
the guy sitting in the corner bar drinking a beer, saying something like that, yeah, I don't know.
he's not a guy sitting in a corner in the bar, though.
I
He's a
grant
guy
that point. I
running
grant that
for
point. But
president.
yeah,
I
okay.
mean, these are statements that he's making in official venues that have been vetted through speechwriters that where we could go down a list of, I don't have the list in front of me of all of the things that he said that are disgusting. He's saying in a presidential debate that Rosie O'Donnell deserves to be called a fat pig or whatever he called it. It's, I mean, everything about that person is disgusting. It is, I don't know how else to say it. He is a repellent character. It is,
I'm sure I'm not alone in having found the Rosie O'Donnell comment funny, although I would not have made it myself, and I understand why Rosie or others would have been offended by it. But I thought it was funny.
I must say, I honestly find him disgusting. Aside from the bigotry and so, he is disgusting. The way that just the fact that he has brought up all these beauty contests and the way that everything about the way that he talks about women and the interactions that he's had that going into the dressing rooms, talking about how he bragging that he can go into the dressing rooms of the teenagers because he owns the pageant and he's allowed to do that. And I'm not even talking about that the 2005 video. There's just everything about him, and then maybe it's just I've got two daughters who are now around the ages of the people that he would be grabbing the behinds of, but. He is a disgusting character, and he doesn't even have the decorum to keep that disgustingness out of the dignified venues through which one is supposed to run for president. And the fact that he is polling anywhere close to Hillary Clinton, who was an ordinary flawed human being, is such a depressing commentary. Uh, you know,
You know,
I,
I don't understand why we don't learn from that. Why isn't that telling us something about our sensibilities? Right? What's wrong with a beauty pageant? A lot of people watch it. A lot of people get pleasure out of seeing these women walk across the stage and displaying their lovely bodies. Sure, if you're a feminist, if you're in the academy, if you're thinking about these things from a certain point of vision, you find it disgusting and reprehensible and all of that. A lot of people find it just life. They just find it just, and why aren't we learning that our sensibility isn't commensurate with the modal sensibility from the very fact that these kinds of behaviors from Trump have not alienated a larger number of people from his support. We have to end up saying that the fact that they don't share our sensibility, let's say about beauty pageants, makes them quote, deplorable, close
Well,
quote.
first of all, there's a complicated discussion about beauty pageants. There's the I'm the lecherous billionaire who buys a beauty pageant so that I can walk into the dressing room when they're getting dressed aspect, which is a whole separate thing. I mean, the guy is
I
uh,
don't think that's been demonstrated that he made the investment so he could go into the dressing room, but
no,
that's
but
neither here nor
he
there.
has bragged about the idea that
But
he
he
can.
has bragged about going into the dressing room. He
And
did.
that is, I mean, the degree to which he speaks about women, that he objectifies women and values their contributions on the basis of whether he finds them sexually appealing. It is disgusting, and it is something that I think that especially I think it's going to, one reason why he's going to lose is I think younger people look at that and they just have a WTF reaction. But he really brings out, I think my theory is that he's actually a laboratory experiment done by the MIT Media Lab and Gender Studies that somehow escaped the containment. I mean, he's almost straight out of central casting for some sort of gender studies, dystopian image of
Okay,
America.
so
So we move
we got to
on to
call
another
this to
topic.
a close. I would say we're at a critical juncture here.
Hmm.
In a few days, either this guy will have been defeated and will be consigned to the dustbin of history, in which case everything that's been said to this point will be just fine, right? I mean, this guy's disgusting. He's going to escape from an MIT lab. The other branch of the decision tree, however, has him winning the election, in which case he's the president of the United States. And I'm just wondering how we go forward from there with a humongous majority of the elite classes thinking
Yeah,
exactly as you've just said, that
yeah,
this guy is just unspeakably disgusting. And now he's president of the United States.
yeah.
So we may not ever get to that branch of the tree, but we'll have a lot to talk about at Blogging Heads if we do.
Yeah, we'll be behind bars talking about it.
Oh,
By the way,
you'll be behind bars. I will have my exculpatory statements that I made saying, "Oh, I'm not so sure he's a racist. I'm not so sure he's a." That might keep me out of jail or at least give me a reduced sentence.
yeah, there you go. By the way, I don't think Trump goes away, and I think the day after, I think Wednesday is going to be one of the most interesting days in the history of American politics. Whatever,
Oh,
happens. And I
yeah,
think, and where people just try to say, okay, what just happened?
right.
And what does the Republican Party do? I mean, I think it's clear that there are people in the Republican Party who look at this as a catastrophic event from their perspective. Whatever happens on Tuesday, I think if they win, it's more catastrophic from their perspective than if they lose. But the fact that it's come this
Yeah,
close,
because he's won without them, in which case there'll be no place for them within the party.
and they all know. I mean, first of all, the Latino vote. I think what will actually lose this for Trump is that there's going to be he really has mobilized the Latino vote even more than Romney did, and it will become like the African American vote, maybe not quite as lopsided, but pretty close. And I think also Republicans know that all the history books are going to write that the Republican Party nominated the worst candidate in recent American history to be president. And whatever people are saying now, that their reputation is, the question is not what do we have to do to win in 2018. In some ways, it's we're not even worthy of winning right now. They're going to win some elections, but how do you look at yourself in the
Harold,
mirror
he
when you
might win.
this guy?
You've just acknowledged that he might win.
Yeah,
So I'm trying to
but
get my head around this idea that I'm a Republican, my candidate of my party wins,
yeah,
and then I have to be ashamed of being a
yeah.
Republican because my
Oh,
candidate
absolutely.
wins.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I think that the fact that if your party nominates someone who is such a disgrace that that first of all his presidency
That's
was
what Democrats should have done in 1988 if somehow Jesse Jackson had gotten the nomination. They should have gone apologizing for the fact that they were Democrats because you nominated somebody, and we could go down the list of Jackson,
well.
offenses. But
First of all, they didn't. First of all, there's no Democratic equivalent to Trump, so we're sort of off in the
yeah,
deep in a hypothetical. But no, I think that what is it about our primary electorate that what is it that allowed us to nominate this guy and that prevented our most prominent people, including Paul Ryan, from clearly repudiating him when he was obviously a threat to the country? That's something that Republicans are going to have to answer for. And if he wins, they really have to answer for it. But if
I,
they lose, they also will. And
I don't agree with you here. I
I
think
think, by the way,
Paul Ryan, what's he going to do, man? He invites primary challenges. You saw what happened to Cantor.
yeah.
He invites a rump caucus in his Republican caucus to unseat him as Speaker of the House. He spits in the face of the majority of the primary electorate that voted for this guy.
Oh, boo effing who? That's he chose his party. That's if you
I
choose your
say, what do
party.
you want him to do? It is, after all, a democracy. The people who were voting Republican spoke when they nominated Trump. You expect him, in the interest of maintaining good offices with the editorial board of the New York Times, to denounce the candidate of his party, who's been affirmed by the majority of the party's voters?
Yeah, I think he says not because it's the New York Times, but because he says I've looked at what this guy says and does, and he would be a horrible president. He would be a threat to the country, and our party messed up, and I can't support this guy. And maybe that means that I lose my primary fight, or maybe it means I'm not speaker anymore. But the fact is that if you are the speaker, you're accountable for the decisions your party makes, and your party made a horrible decision, and either you stand up to it or you give these mealy-mouthed responses to it. I mean, suppose that he wins narrowly, and people and he has a horrible presidency,
That's the only way
and
he's going to win, is narrowly.
people say, in that final moment, Paul Ryan could have prevented Donald Trump from being president and spared the country all this crap if he just said, you know what, let's don't vote for Trump. He's horrible, and we got to take a loss this time because we messed up. That would that's what all the historians would say, and that's what I would say. And country before party.
Suppose
The
he
Republican
wins.
Party
Suppose
is
he wins and does a
disgraceful.
passable job. Suppose the Republicans maintain control of both houses. Suppose the direction of the country gets pushed in the direction that Paul Ryan wants to move it. Then he could say, although our candidate was not perfect, we managed to get something done in the nitty gritty, complex reality of American politics. No, maybe in retrospect, when he's writing his memoirs, he's not the candidate that I would have chosen. But as a matter of fact, the voters spoke, and we got something done. He gets to say that.
Well, to me, that's
It,
just
it,
not. To me, it's risking the future of the country in a way that cannot be defended. And I just think that. And I'll tell you one thing. I get calls all the time from Republican policy professionals who ask for curbside consults on disability policy, whatever. Most of these folks are never Trump, and I'm quite happy to talk to them. The people that are sort of prominent Trump supporters, I'll deal with them if it's something that's really important. But boy. I mean, I just feel that this was the moral test, and they failed. And I feel zero sympathy. I mean, okay, Paul Ryan has a difficult political dilemma. He might lose the seat, or he might
there's
lose
not even
the
the
seat if there's
slightest
too bad.
hint of self righteousness in the idea that in a country of 300 million people, where, I don't know, 45% of the eligible voters disagree with you, it's a moral offense to take the other side of the issue from you. I
I
mean,
didn't feel this way about Mitt Romney. I didn't feel this way about John McCain. I feel this way about Donald Trump. He is.
you're speaking for yourself. It doesn't. That's not a demonstration of moral truth. I mean, you say it as if it's self-evident that being a Trump supporter puts you on the side of barbarity and immorality. And I just think a little bit more modesty might be more becoming.
I
I
don't.
think
I
you could
don't
be
think.
wrong. You could be wrong.
I could, I don't feel that way, by the way, about rank and file Trump supporters. I think that a lot of people vote for Trump for a lot of different reasons. I love my brother-in-law who's going to vote for Donald Trump. He's got his reasons to do it. He works, he has a blue collar job and he hasn't gotten a raise in a long time. He's worried his job is going to move to Mexico. And
Yeah.
at a human level, I think a policy or political professional who supports Trump, who understands who this guy is and how dangerous he is, to me, that is the fact that the democratic process might elect this guy is a fact about the democratic process, but it's not a fact about how much I need to respect that that the outcome that was reached was the justified one. I mean, it is lots of horrible people get elected through democratic processes, and there's always that moment when one of the things the process relies on is there's certain people who are outliers, and when they show up, that's when you got to really stand up, even if it costs you something. And some of Mitt Romney stood up. Stuart Stevens has stood up. The Bush family has essentially stood up. Although it'd be nice if they were a little more explicit, but they've obviously spoken. John Kasich. A lot of Republicans have said, "I can't support this guy," and the ones that and then there's a bunch of other people who prevaricated and they sort of unendorsed for a while, and then when their own
They're going to
supporters
look a
started to come
lot
back,
different if he wins than if he loses. If he loses, they're going to be golden, and if he wins, they're going to these people the hashtag never Trumpers are not going to look so good.
oh, I think they'll look really good.
Except in the
I,
left wing of the Democratic Party,
no, no,
where they
but I
will
think
be
that I
lionized.
think they'll look 2 years. They'll look really good 2 years from now when it's obvious that Trump is a catastrophe. And I think the smart strategic move for anybody who had any sort of foresight was to be strongly anti-Trump because I just think that I also think, by the way, whether he wins or loses, for the next 6 months, there's going to be a profusion of scandals and headlines about negative things about Trump that couldn't quite be nailed down during the campaign that are now coming out. I think it's going to turn out. I would not at all be surprised if he.
Substitute Clinton for Trump in that sentence, and it's got the same truth value.
I think there's a risk of that, but I think that there's almost a certainty of that with Trump. I think with his taxes, with women coming forward, with just so many things I think it was. I think that the people that sort of were fellow travelers of Trump are really made a bad bet on him, even though he came a lot closer to winning than he's coming a lot closer to winning than makes any of us comfortable.
Okay, Harold. I see that it's an impregnable fortress that you've
It
got
is.
built around yourself, and I will not penetrate it. So I'm going to let you have the last word.
Okay.
Take care, my friend.
You too.